Hello, my name's Will Ray, and I'd like to talk to you today about a piece of paper. You might think that a piece of paper is a strange thing to talk about in a session about interactive visualization, but I hope to convince you by the time I'm done that it's both a interactive visualization and a good way to think about a variety of problems that we don't typically think about in a lot of visualization. Today, I'm going to talk about a variety of visualization that I am going to call exigent visualization. Exigent visualization in this case is a situation where good enough is better than better. This particular visualization comes about as a result of a request that I had from a clinician. The clinician wanted a way to estimate the percentage of bodies which were affected by burns better than their existing tools could estimate. The reason that they wanted a better way to do it was because the estimation of the size of burns, the percentage of a body affected by burns, has been getting worse since the early 1990s. And a few percent error in the estimate of how much a burn affects is not a big deal, but they are getting patients coming into the emergency room with a burn which is 25% of their body that's been estimated at 75% of their body, or a burn that's 60% of their body that's been estimated at 15% of their body. And this makes a huge difference in how they're cared for. One of the first things that it makes a huge difference in is how much fluid gets put into them. Burns leak, and you need to add fluid back at a proportional rate to the size of the burn on the person's body. And if you put in too much, the individual swells up like an overripe tomato. You have to slit their arms and legs open so that they maintain peripheral circulation. It's called an escherotomy. Medicine is disgusting. Stay far away from it. Or if you put in too little, they dehydrate and they have a heart attack and die. So getting the amount of fluid correct is reasonably important if you don't want to have potentially life-threatening complications. The way that the clinicians estimate the size of a burn is using a thing called a London Browder chart. At least that's the most common way of doing it. The London Browder chart is a piece of paper. On that piece of paper is the drawing, the surface of a person's body in a very schematic form. And on that body, the chart is broken up into a number of pieces that are pieces of the body. So the upper arm, the lower arm, the hand, the torso, the neck, the head, etc. And different values are indicated on the chart. So the torso is 13%, the upper arm is 2%, the upper leg is 4%, etc. The clinician is presented with a patient who has a burn covering some portion of their body, and they have to figure out how big that burn is. So they look at the patient, they look at the chart, they say, well, that's, I don't know, maybe a third of 13%. What is that? That's sick, and that's maybe a quarter of the 2% arm, so that's 1, and that's a quarter of the upper leg, so that's 1, so that's 23%, I think, maybe. And then they put fluid into them based on 23%, and the answer's wrong. For a long time, clinicians have been assuming that the reason that they get wrong answers is because of the obesity epidemic. The charts were made, the numbers were put in the charts in the early 1940s. World War II, everyone was on war rations, everyone was much more fit than the average person is today, and as errors have cropped up, they've assumed that it's because people have been becoming morphologically different than people in the 1940s. As a result, they keep trying to correct the chart. They keep trying to fix the visualization. They look at and they say, well, an obese person must have a larger torso, so let's make that 14% instead of 13%, and a larger upper leg, so let's make that 5%. And then, of course, they have to distribute the errors somewhere else. They test it out, and what they discover is that people still end up coming into the operating room with estimates that are off by 50%. And those estimates that are off by 50%, while they've been assuming that it's because of changes in the size of their regional percentages, It's really difficult to come up with, if you change this from 13 to 14 or even 18%, it's difficult to add those numbers up, the errors up to a 50% error. So my group did something that nobody's done in 30 years for some reason. We actually tried to figure out how errors occur in the chart. We decided to try to understand where the total error in the visualization, where the total error that came out in the answer came from when clinicians used this visualization tool. And so the first place that an error could occur is maybe the numbers are wrong in the chart. This is what people have been trying to fix for 30 years. They've been pushing the numbers around, attempting to correct the numbers in the chart to fix the huge errors that are coming out at the end. So there could be chart error. There could be assessment error. It could be that the clinician has difficulty determining what is burned and what is not burned. They could make assignment errors. They could have difficulty deciding where the burn is on the chart. They might know where it is on the patient. They might have a hard time assigning it to the chart and knowing whether it's part of that 13% or part of this 4%. Or they could have trouble when they try and figure out what a third of 13% plus a quarter of 2% plus maybe that's a third of 1% and 10% of 4%. Maybe they have trouble actually figuring out those sub-regions and adding them up. So we'll call that calculation error. For the past 30 years, they've been trying to fix big errors that come out at the end of the determination of the total body surface area burned by trying to fix errors here. We propose that the errors are here, that the errors occur in calculation. And so we tried to come up with a way to fix this chart so that it was an easier visualization for clinicians to use. What we did was we removed these body area dividers and our 13%, etc. And we made a visualization which is fundamentally worse than the visualization using the London Browder chart. We broke the body up into a bunch of roughly 3-inch high slices. And if you position them just right, you can get 100 of them between the front and the back of the body. And we said, go through the chart, and if there's a burn in a region, put a check mark there. And when you're done, count the check marks and write down the number. This has vastly worse chart error, but no different assessment and assignment. But it's got much better calculation error. And as a result, a worse visualization produces smaller errors. We cut the error down from about 12% average error, plus or minus about 12% standard deviation in the error, down to about 4% average error and about 5% standard deviation. This is huge. That's the difference between a patient potentially dying at 2 standard deviations out on the canonical London Browder chart and a patient being transported to a regional burn center when they didn't need to, but probably not even getting an overload or underload of fluid, which is critical for their actual future care. So I think this is particularly interesting. The figuring out where the errors can creep into the visualization and optimizing the visualization, even if it means making the visualization worse, less accurate. You'll note that little slice of the cake down at the ankle is not, if this is 1%, this is not 1% and vice versa. We don't care. They're close enough. The answer that they get is close enough to the right total that it's not clinically relevant. If we make the visualization better, if we make the visualization more accurate, they get worse answers. I think it has profound implications for other varieties of visualization and the choices that are made in how you approach optimizing a visualization. We sort of assume that making a visualization better, that making it closer to the truth, somehow makes it better for the user. Here's a case where making it closer to the truth makes it worse for the user.